Welcome. This session is focused on how your organization manages change and is AI change any different? I'm Sarah Troia. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of Project Evident, and I also lead our Outcomes AI team. I'm really excited that we're starting off today's conversation about people and the people side of AI integration. I think too often when our sector and in general, when society is talking about AI, we focus on the technology. We focus on the implementation, we focus on monitoring and assessing. But what we know is true is that for most technology implementations, and this is true in the nonprofit sector as well as in the for-profit sector, when they don't work, it is likely that they don't work because the people rejected the change. So this is a wonderful opportunity to really start thinking about AI adoption and integration by starting to think about how you're going to work with people. So today we are so fortunate to be welcomed and joined by Dr. Summer Jackson. She's an assistant professor at Harvard Business School, and she focuses on change management and organizational behavior. Alina Yang, Head of Transformation at Braven. I think that title says it all. And Lorne Rodriguez, Manager of Enterprise Generative AI at Chicago Public Schools. Just a moment of housekeeping before we get started. We'll spend about 30 minutes in facilitated conversation based on some questions that we've sourced from the community. We'll then move it over to you, to your questions. I encourage you to use the Q&A button throughout the conversation and to also upvote over the course of these 30 minutes to the questions that are most important to you to get answered, and we will answer those questions in 10 minutes of Q&A. At the end of Q&A, after thanking you all for being a part of this, each of the speakers will move to their own breakout room in the lounge. So if your question didn't get answered, or you have a very specific question you want to ask one of our speakers, I encourage you to go to the lounge and talk to that speaker directly. In addition, over the course of our time together, speakers will be referencing resources that they think could be helpful to you because they were helpful to them on their journey. If you look to the right of your screen, you will see a little icon that looks like a book or a couple pieces of paper. That is the resource icon. Those are all the resources around change management that this group has curated for your continued learning. All right, and with that, I am really delighted to turn it over to our speakers. So Summer, I'm going to start with you. I'm hoping you can really ground us in just some of the academic thinking about change management, what we've learned about how people absorb change. What is at the heart of motivating people towards change?
Hi, good morning. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for that question, Sarah. I'm very excited to be here with you all. When we think about change management in general, right, especially if you've gone through a change management initiative yourself, as you were mentioning, it's mostly the people that are the sticky points in the rollout and the implementation. And we've sort of, over time, through various studies, boiled it down to sort of two big questions that people are asking themselves when they're dealing with a change management initiative. One is like, do I think this is a good idea? And that's usually about something for the company, right? Does this like make logical sense? Is this going to help with our bottom line or something like that? And that's often where change leaders focus, right? They focus on the buy-in of trying to like make a logic-based argument around why this is a good idea. The harder part, and the second question that people ask themselves is, do I think this is a good idea for me? Do I see a world in which I can be part of this change initiative and still be part of the organization? And that's an under-focused question for leaders. They often underestimate how much anxiety it causes people to go through this change management initiative and to really renegotiate their relationship with their organization, right? Both what it means to be an employee there, the type of work that they're going to do, the type of organization that they're going to become. It actually can trigger this sort of existential relationship crisis for the employee. And that's often the underfocused part that people who are rolling out the change initiative don't really spend as much time on as they should.
I think what we have seen in our work is that even if you're starting with back office implementation, so things that aren't necessarily on topic for your mission, for your program, you're still talking about job change. You're still talking about change management. So even if you perceive that as a lower risk way to engage with AI, you still have to engage with people. you still have to recognize that change only happens with and through your stakeholders. So, Lorne, I know you know this intimately, and you have been leading change and part of a very big change management activity at Chicago Public Schools. Can you give people a sense of the breadth of organization that we're talking about for change? And then how does CPS build a process to engage people to support change?
Absolutely. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So for CPS, when we're thinking about change management, we luckily have a team devoted to change management, the organizational change management team. And so when we were thinking about are we going to approach AI in CPS, we partnered with the organizational change management team and we implemented the structures that they already had in place. And so they have a stakeholder engagement plan. We log all the stakeholder groups, the individual stakeholders, level of impact, level of influence, the talking points, the needs, the wants for potential stakeholder groups. But when we think about something like AI, which is more of a rival technology, which is something that I first heard Aaron Moat, who's actually speaking today as well from Innovate EDU, mention, is that it impacts all of our stakeholders. And so when we're thinking about typical change management in an organization, there's a subset of users who are going to be impacted by that change. If you're changing a platform, there's only a certain number of people who are actually interacting with that platform and have to be caught up on the change of that platform or change from platform to a different platform. With this technology, it's impacting all of our stakeholders. And so we have to think about how does it impact all of our different stakeholders? What are all of the different stakeholder needs? How do we speak to all the different individual stakeholders, especially with an organization like CPS, where we have the full education side of the house. So we have the schools, which you have the students, the teachers, the school leaders, the school site staff. But then you think about the organization itself of CPS, we have the central office, which we have departments just like any other typical organization where we have finance, law, procurement, talent. And so we have to meet the needs of the individual stakeholder and therefore adjust the language and the way that we are approaching the stakeholder when we're talking about a technology like AI. And so for us, we really had to make sure, okay, we have to think about it from each of these individual perspectives for all these different stakeholders, but then also tap into where they are receiving their information. We don't want to create yet a new way of interacting with these stakeholders because we know they're already inundated with comms from the district. A teacher receives communications from their principal, the central office, the network, everywhere. And so we really want to find where are those individual stakeholders going for their information, what are their trusted sources, and then tapping into those networks, not creating entirely new ones.
Lauren, could you give folks a sense of the scale of CPS? So when we talk about managing change through that institution, just how big is it? And then you had a very sophisticated cascading way that you set up learning for the organization and engagement for the organization. And I wonder if you can both provide the scale as well as some of the structure you put in place to really manage change, people structure you put in place.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we're talking about the stakeholders in CPS, we have close to 400,000 stakeholders when we're considering students and staff. So about 315,000 students, around 45,000 staff, including about 25,000 teachers. That's also not including parents, guardians, community members as well, which are also stakeholders that we have to consider when we're thinking about what kind of communications and information and resources and supports that we are creating. We want to create the supports for the parents, guardians, community members as well. So that adds the stakeholder, that increases the stakeholder number. But when we're thinking about the structure for CPS, we wanted to take an approach that would ensure that we have people from various different departments and organizations in CPS a part of the work. And so about 2 years ago, we structured our first steering committee. So the AI steering committee, actually in January of 2024 was the first meeting we ever had. And then following that, the next year, we were like, okay, our organization is too big to have just a steering committee. So then we created operating committees. And each operating committee focuses on a key domain. So operational efficiency, instructional practice, data and analytics. And then we created a whole operating committee that just consists of school leaders because we knew how important that role is at the school side as the leader of the schools. They also have to deal with the education side of the house, but also running the building, right? And so all the everything that goes along with the facility itself. And so we wanted to make sure that we had their voices as a part of that governance framework, is what we refer to this network of governing bodies. But we also made sure that we have over 30 different departments and offices represented in this work. We have about 120 people from across the organization in any various governance body there. And we formed that a year ago. And then this year, we created working groups so that we can actually have the operating committees are more like philosophical research thinking, and then the working groups is, okay, what can we actually develop in these groups that can service the district and all of our individual stakeholders? And we also created the guidebook, which is a resource that I think we're sharing here as well as the website to our guidebook.
And I'd like to make note for folks in in the resource button, we have a case study that features Chicago Public Schools as their change management process with lots of great links in that. And we also have a webinar that features Lorne, again, answering questions and talking about change management. So those resources are available to you if you'd like to do further thinking around change management. So Alina, Braven, not an organization that has multiple of hundreds of thousands of individuals. So for Braven, can you give folks a sense of the size of the organization and how you thought about institutionalizing change, including your title, which is really unique. I haven't heard that title previously in our sector.
Totally. So we are much smaller than CPS. We are about 200 people, and this has been really rapid growth. When I started 8 years ago, we had 15 people on staff, and our organization works with students in college to make sure that they can land in strong jobs after graduating. So about half of our team is in our regional sites, about half in the center. And how we thought about change is really both from the top down and bottom up. And so from the top down, we know how important it is in terms of where your leadership spends time and what our priorities are. And so one of the things that Braven did as an organization is in this last year actually created this function of transformation. And it sits directly reporting to our CEO on our executive leadership team, because we know that there's so much change happening in the world and we have to be able to be responsive to it. And a big part of that, my number one priority, is actually making sure that we have a cohesive AI strategy as an organization. And I am actually not in, I do not have a technology background. I actually think it's been really great for us, because what I am is curious and thinking about how we connect dots. And so I work super closely with our chief technology officer and the rest of our leadership team to make sure that across the board we have a strong stretch. So that's one piece, just in terms of my title and role. The other thing I would say is we have made it our a change overall, not just about AI, an important part of how our CEO spends her time and our leadership team spends our time. Every year we have a culture survey and we ask our teams what we can do better, what we're doing well. Our CEO goes on a listening tour to every single team in every single region and really listens closely about what that is. And so a big part of our culture plan for this year is making sure, as we've grown as an organization, we are really intentional in our change management and internal communication. So we are in the process of choosing a framework that we want to use and making sure that as we make major decisions and communicate them out, we're thoughtful about it. And AI enablement is one of those pieces that we're weaving together. We're also making sure every single person finding value in AI is an organizational goal. And so, tying to what Summer said, from the bottoms up perspective, we are also trying to meet people where they are and recognize that a lot of people, their first thought is, am I going to lose my job if we're really emphasizing efficiency? And the answer is no. What we're trying to do as a growing organization is just say our growth in terms of our staffing and our budget is not linear to what our impact is trying to be. And so we want to encourage every single person at the individual level, team level, to find ways that they can leverage AI. And so the final thing I would say is we've been trying to make sure that people just get in the game, where there's lots of valid reasons that you might be worried about the impact of AI on the environment, the biases, but actually the best way is to then use it and be a part of the change versus letting the change happen to you. And we have found some early adopters or folks who are curious and want to build and help them then teach others and bring them along.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Alina. So first of all, one of the things I love that you just mentioned is that you are literally shopping different change management frameworks that are going to feel like they're the best fit for your organizations. We have 3 that are linked in the resource button. We have the Actar model, we have the Cotter model, and we have the Lewin model. And I just want to say that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so, please, I'm not saying that these are the best change management frameworks, that you should modify them all for your organization. But there are a significant amount of resources out there. In fact, resources that Summer has been studying. She's also provided resources for you. It's a whole academic field, change management, that's been around, I think, for maybe 30 years, 30 or 40 years. So don't think that you have to start from zero. Please avail yourself of the resources that are out there. I think one of the things that I've heard both Lorne and Alina touch on is the importance of communication, and whatever change management framework we're going to look at, communication is going to be a key step. And I think one of the real challenges that I have seen in my 20-year odd history in the nonprofit and social sector is that there can be a debate about full transparency, that's sort of required when we think about internal communications, versus communications. I'm not saying that their full transparency and communications are entirely different, but like, should you be fully transparent? And so, Summer, I'd love you to share with us a little bit about what does the academic literature say about communications? How should we be thinking about bringing people along?
That's a great question. Thank you, Sarah. I'll say that this is informed by research that I've done with many fast-growing technology companies, which sort of like to think of themselves as these fully transparent, flat organizations. It fits within a broader literature as well, but what I observed in studying these companies, and also from reading the literature, is that what people are looking for when they're talking about transparency, leaders often think that means like this false dichotomy between like, I can be consensus driven and I can bring everybody into the decision, but it's going to be slower moving. Or I can mandate something from the top down and it may be rejected and people may not like it, right? I seem like dictatorial or something. That dichotomy is false, right? The way to think about it is, what am I going to do around decision rights and what am I going to do around voice rights? And decision rights mean, as a leader, ultimately you have to make the decision, but the way that you can bring people in is by inviting them on what's the decision to actually be made, right? We can often conflate the question that we're trying to answer and think that it needs to be this higher level, but if you actually invited people in, you can get to a much more finer grained, more acute, accurate and acute question. So the first thing that you can invite people in on is, what's the decision that we need to make? And then the next thing that you can invite them in on is like, how are we going to make that decision? Like, what are the metrics that we're going to use? How are we going to know when we've been successful? And that's how you can also utilize sort of their on the ground, much closer to the problem knowledge of what does this actually look like, without sort of delaying the process and creating this big, like, we're all going to agree on the decision, but we can agree on what does success look like, or how are we going to measure success and get there. And so really making sure that you reserve the ultimate decision, but you invite people in on 2 questions. What's the decision to be made, and how are we going to make that decision?
Lorne, can you share a little bit about, again, very large organization, how you think about communication? Because I know you have a sophisticated and varied way of reaching folks. We internally, when I've led change management at other nonprofits and organizations, I often think about the 5 times 5 ways, right? You have to share messages at least 5 times before people really hold on to them when it's outside of the responsibilities they may have in their general workday. In addition, adults learn in various realms. You have visual learners, you have people who learn through motion, you have people who learn auditorily. And so how do you provide communications at least 5 times, but in 5 different ways? And I feel like CPS has a great diversity of learners across 300,000 folks. How do you manage the communication?
So when we were thinking about how are we going to manage communications for this change, we started thinking about, okay, first, going back to what I said previously, where are the individual stakeholders going for their information? That's number one. So we started tapping directly into those. So we have roles called technology coordinators. So they basically manage the technology in the schools. There are techos. They have a whole monthly techo webinar every month. I have a standing session in that TECO webinar every month. We have a teaching and learning newsletter, which reaches all of our teachers and the teaching and learning department once a month. I have the same section designated in that. Same information goes both in the TECO webinar and in the teaching and learning newsletter. We have something called the Summer Leadership or School Leader Update, which is a twice a week update that goes out to all school leaders. I put information in there. Then we start creating new forms. So we have our community of practice, which we refer to as the CPS neural network. So it's made up of over 500 stakeholders from across the district opt in. So we just let people know that it exists and they tell me they want to join and they can jump in. We provide information directly there, including every week we do like a what's new in AI. So every Friday we send out a what happened in the news with regarding AI, and we make sure not to be just talking about AI in education. We absolutely do mention updates around AI in education, but we also talk about what's happening outside of education as well, because that goes to the fact that this is a technology that isn't just going to impact education or our work, it's also impacting our lives outside of work and outside of education. So we really want to make sure that we're talking about that. We also, one of the other things that the organizational change management team typically does, and so we took this as well, is AI change champions. And so we actually put out a opt-in, again, sign up to become an AI change champion. We have over 250 people who signed up to be change champions. And those are all varied stakeholders. Same in the neural network. They're varied stakeholders, so teachers, school leaders, central office employees. Same thing with the change champions. We meet once a month with them. We provide them updates, give them resources. They go back to their respective communities, and they act as a two-way flow of information. So they take what they get from us and give it to their respective communities, whether that's a school or a network or a department, and then they bring back any feedback or information back to us so that we ensure that we are hearing the voices from those various communities. And then we've also created our stakeholder engagement plan, which we're doing focus groups and interviews. So we've already conducted 25 interviews with executive directors and above, so deputy chiefs, chiefs from across the district, 30 to 45-minute interviews with them just to hear their voice. And then we're about to kick off our focus groups. Those are going to be 5 to 6 people per group, depending on their specific concerns and also combination of their role, so that we can really target and listen to and hear from any given role in the district, because one role is going to provide different concerns than a different role. Not all, entirely, but some of them, and if not most of them, would be different. So really trying to implement all of these different ways of actually reaching these different groups of people, but also hearing from them, allowing that flow back to us so that we are ensuring that we're hearing what they are saying as well, and not just acting as like we're pushing this information out. We want to actually receive this information. And this goes to some of our principles as well. We defined what our AI principles are, and one of them is ethical and transparent. So always want to be transparent about the decisions we're making, and hearing their voice is a part of that, but then also continuous improvement, because this technology is constantly evolving and adapting. We have to be open and willing to constantly evolve and adapt along with this technology. We can't be stagnant, because this technology is not going to allow us to be. And so the same, like over the past 2 years, even the AI guidebook as an example, the reason why we created a guidebook was specifically because a policy would have taken way too long to actually get approved and published. By the time that would have happened, it would have been outdated and we would need to update it. And so we took the approach of a guidebook so that we can actually make quarterly updates to it. And so we've been making quarterly updates to it. And now that it's been out for about a year and a half, we're doing a complete review and analysis of the guidebook to ensure that everything in there is as up to date as possible and reflecting the advancements of this technology and the way that those advancements are impacting all of our different stakeholders.
So Alina, I'm interested in hearing about what does this look like in terms of communication inside of an organization that's 200 people. And in our conversation before the panel, what was exciting to me is both how you thought about what were the standard places that people got information, as Lorne was just referring to, what that looks like inside of your organization. But you also had very real clarity on the messages and how you were anchoring the messages that you wanted to give people about change.
So I was taking notes, Lauren, while you were talking of all the things we could bring back. In terms of the consistent places, we have an all-team virtual meeting every other week. So we've been trying to make sure quarterly we do something virtual. We want to bring a town hall into our organization, and we've decided that actually AI and getting people learning and practicing AI is the first and most important thing. So just literally, we don't have all of the methods that CPS has yet, but just that consistent framing or cadence is one piece. Overall, as an organization, one of the things we try to always ground in is truth and hope. And as it comes to AI, is what we also are trying to do. So, what that means for us is we are very honest about the fact that it is having a real impact on our students. Our students are graduating into entry level roles, and it's hitting them first. And our students in the Bay Area who are computer science grads, engineering grads, were the first to have us see this signal a year and a half, 2 years ago, before it became everywhere. That wow, like they are not getting jobs in the way that they used to be. So being open and honest about the real impact, and also optimistic about what is possible. And that is, we as an organization are always grounded in our students are incredible and they have amazing stories and assets, and they should think of themselves that way, and we should think of themselves that way. And so the resilience, the curiosity, the teamwork, the leadership that has gotten them to where they are will continue to get them to where they want to go, and will continue to be valuable skills as AI is changing everything about the future of work. And so that balance, and especially tied to then our organizational mission and vision of where we're trying to go, is what we always try to ground in. And then back to connecting, what does it look like for me personally in the last year or so.
I'm going to encourage folks who are listening, if you have questions about change management, please put those in the question box. And if there's a question you really like, please upvote it. We'll make sure that we get to those questions after we finish the facilitated conversation. Summer, I'd like to turn to you for a moment, because we know that change management is not a straight line. It's like Shakespeare said, the course of true love never did run smooth. The same can be said for change management. There are always setbacks. So how do organizations build resilience in the face of setbacks around change?
That's a great question. And especially around AI, it can be really tough because obviously it's constantly evolving, right? And the workspace that you're in is constantly evolving. And so how you think about building resilience in that kind of environment. I'm building on a lot of the lessons that Lorne and Alina have already laid out here. You have to think about who are going to be your big champions with this technology. I like what Alina was saying, is like giving people opportunities to work with this technology on their own terms and to try it out. Because calling back to the beginning, one of the big things that happens when you introduce change is this renegotiation of an identity. And with AI, it's an even larger kind of like identity crisis, because it's not just that like now you have to sort of change some of your work around. The actual meaning of what it means to be a teacher, of what it means to be a computer scientist, to be a software engineer is changing, because your tasks are moving around. And some of these tasks are ones that, for example, you're happy to get rid of and have AI help you with. And some of them are actually core to your occupational identity and how you think of yourself, and you don't want to give them up. And you're really struggling to understand how you can continue to be this profession, to be this teacher, to be this social worker, to be this software engineer, when some of these core tasks are being taken away to AI. And so giving people opportunities to try this out on their own and sort of renegotiate their occupational role and their identity and their space within the organization is one way that you can sort of build resilience. The constant sort of communications around what's working and what isn't, making sure you always have like a ground, like on the ground level way of learning information, because you may also miss opportunities to harness this sort of ambivalence that people are experiencing, right? Like there are pros and cons, and you may be only looking for the cons, and you may miss out on how actually people experimenting with this technology have discovered something that's helpful for the organization as a whole or for their colleagues. And so making sure that you are always finding channels for people to sort of raise both the good, the bad, and the ugly about the change initiative is really important. And then, recognizing that people are going to want to do these mental tryouts and then try it out themselves, and they may go back, right? If it was so easy, we would obviously, as you say, have this linear progression, but sort of even just preparing people for the fact that there will be setbacks, we will have to reiterate, we will have to pivot, and we're looking forward to the opportunities and to learning from you all where we can sort of make those changes. I think even at the beginning is really important so that people don't view those setbacks as like a fait accompli failure, and we shouldn't have done this in the first place.
So before we move to questions from the audience, I'm going to do a bit of a speed round over the next 5 minutes for each of you. If you were advising another educational institution, if you were advising another nonprofit, if you were advising clients somewhere about implementing AI, what's the common change management mistakes that they should avoid? I think often we don't share with us things that we don't share amongst ourselves, things that haven't worked. And actually failure is one of the best ways that we can learn, particularly in this all teach, all learn moment, because the change management surrounded by AI is different than change management that's happened previously. Again, because it's an arrival technology, as Lorne has mentioned, it affects all of your stakeholders, not just a subset of the members of your staff. Also, it is arriving into your organizations where everybody has a point of view. It's not like you're bringing a technology or a change in that is neutral. People have been reading and thinking and maybe playing with AI for 5 months to 3 years at this point, potentially. And so you're not entering into neutral ground. So again, what can we share with others around best advice? This is where we often fall down. And Alina, may I start with you?
The thing I would say is just to remember that technology change is human change. You started off this panel by essentially saying that, and I think that's the most important thing. Not just AI. Our organization just went through a process where we wanted to come off of Asana as our project management tool onto Jira, and that was a tech change that was so messy. And the biggest thing that we learned was it was contained, largely led by the tech team, and didn't have enough universal partnership in terms of rolling it out. And technology might be cool, but you've got to be able to use it and see the value on a day-to-day basis. And so to just remember that, and probably it's going to take, like, you said 5 times 5 ways, 5 times as long in some ways as what you might think, but there's so much value in going slow to go fast.
Yeah.
And so just being thoughtful about the human side of the change alongside the technology, I would say, is the biggest piece. My second quick add is just start. Just start, do something, go play in it, go like try a prompt. I didn't know what vibe coding was 3 weeks ago, and then I got a prompt to do, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I'm showing everyone now. So that's the other piece of it.
Yeah, I can't underscore enough how important play is. And there's a session later on today where we're talking about innovation, and play is a big part of experimentation and lowering the stakes around inviting people in to using AI. Lorne, what are your sort of learn from me? These are the top mistakes around change management for AI.
I think it goes back to the transparency side of things, ensuring that you have clearly defined principles. We defined what AI literacy means to us. And so, because depending on who you talk to about and you ask them what AI literacy means, you're going to get a different answer. And so when we're talking about AI literacy in CPS, we've defined what we mean so that we can always point to it. And always going back to the different perspectives, opinions, familiarity, concerns, feelings about this technology, you have to welcome all of those in and not go too far one way and another, especially in an organization as large as ours, where every room that you enter, you're going to have that mix. And we actually do that when we have our trainings. We start the whole session with basically like on a scale of 1 to 5, how familiar are with you? How do you feel about it? What concerns do you have? And you're always going to have a mix. And so you don't want to push any part of your organization away by speaking in one way or another, being too pro AI or too anti AI. You want to be able to be open and welcoming to all of your stakeholders and pull them into the conversation, because all of the feelings and perspectives are valid, and we need to have these conversations in order to move forward as a single organization, as opposed to breaking up into silos. And I think one major thing that I learned over the first year and a half, was to clearly articulate that what the work that I'm driving here around AI literacy isn't pro AI, it's pro AI literacy. And so we've received a lot of concerns around the way that we were talking about things previously, and we wanted to just clear that up. We're not saying everybody has to use AI or anything along those lines. We're saying we all need to be aware of the implications of this technology, how it's built, how is it impacting all of our lives, and especially how is it impacting our students. When we're thinking about the students in our organization, they're K through 12, right? And so what's going to happen if when a kindergartner graduates high school in 12 years? None of us knows what the world is going to look like in 12 years from now. And right now, that's okay. And we need to have that conversation so that we can all prepare our students for this potential world that they're going to move into. But we can only do that if we're all working together.
Summer, can you bring us home on this? What's your advice?
Yes, I'd love to. I think the big thing that I would want to underscore when you're sort of dealing with a change initiative that is around AI technology, is this renegotiation that happens amongst your employees around their identities, both how they relate to the organization, how they think about their role, and even like how they think about what it means to be a member of that organization going forward. And this is like both of this ambivalence that they may experience is not necessarily negative. Sometimes we see this in like NPS scores or some of our surveys. We see some of these negative sentiments matched with some excitement or interest, and that ambivalence is actually really helpful for harnessing bringing those people along eventually, right? You need to go back to the core questions of like, beyond the dollars and cents and the efficiency arguments, my employees seem to be really struggling with their identity within the organization, what it means to do their role here, what it means for our organization as a whole to be moving into this new space. And so how can I meet them there? How can I help to address those concerns? How can I give them opportunities to understand what the new role is going to be like? Identifying ways in which we can actually use the technology to take some of the tasks that they find more tedious or burdensome off of their plate, and the ones that they're going to have to, become the human in the loop, or it'll complement or augment their work, that were more meaningful to them. Yeah. Let's figure out how to renegotiate it so that they can see that it's actually like complementary or of their work, without them losing like their core identity of that work. And so just really thinking about how your employees are going through an identity renegotiation is like core when you're doing AI-based change management.
Yeah. I'm going to switch us now to some of the questions we've been receiving in the chat. First, I want to note that there's a question around how do I choose among AI vendors? And I'm going to suggest for folks who are interested in that question to attend the Safe and Fair Practice session, which includes how do you think about risk mitigation? How do you think about environmental concerns? How do you make those choices? And how do you create policies or guidelines around how your organization is going to operate? So I'm going to not try and answer this question here, as this is a change management panel, but really encourage folks to attend that session. And if you can't attend that session, it will be recorded and be available to you by Friday. The question I would like to put into this room is, and this is a little bit similar to the setback questions, it's just how do you sustain momentum? Alina, how have you sustained momentum internally around AI adoption?
I think it's multifold. One is we are in the process of finalizing our priorities for the next year. And we've actually said AI is not going to be its own call out anymore, because we don't want people to keep thinking it is the shiny thing. It's important, it's here, and it's here to stay, but we're folding it into other things. Because at the end of the day, it's an enabler. And over time, we will think of it as a tool for all of the other things that it can serve. And so grounding on what we are trying to do with it, the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and then the different ways of success stories, and just making it fun. You said low stakes earlier, but making it fun. When we did it with our leadership team in February, it was right after the Super Bowl, and it was this theme that Justin Steele mentioned of, we got to get people in the game and in the conversation, and it's like being at a club, and so we just had people dance to Bad Bunny, and to start off the conversation. So I think that's another way, is just change it up, and we're all on the journey together.
Summer, is there anything you've seen from the academic literature or your experience consulting with those fast-moving technology companies around how do you keep the motivation present?
That's a good question. I think some things that I've seen that work are opportunities for people to see it in practice, right? If they themselves aren't comfortable experimenting with the technology, or they don't feel like it's their purview for some reason, even though, as Lorne says, like when this technology is implemented, it actually affects everybody. Having like live demonstration opportunities for people to see how this technology could be useful to them. Oftentimes, limitations of imagination are real, right? So if you don't really understand how this technology could be helpful to you, even just giving a couple demonstrations is really helpful for people. On the flip side, some people may just be more reserved, and they actually want their own private space to work with the technology without being evaluated, without being monitored. And so also carving out time for people who are sort of on the more introverted side or the more private side to actually have space to experiment with the technology while they're at work in a way it's non-evaluative is also really helpful. I think those would be the two big ones, either a public demonstration so that people can start to get their imaginative juices going around how to use the technology, or time at work to experiment on their own time away from monitoring and evaluation.
Yeah. Lauren, we have a different question that's come in that I'd love you to respond to. And it's, at what stage does change management end and just become the way we do things? And I think one of the things that's so interesting about this type of change that we've discussed together is that it's an ongoing change, right? That the technology itself is in rapid evolution. You even said 12 years from now, who knows what AI will be for the students who are currently in kindergarten. So how do you think about the horizon for managing change inside of CPS?
Honestly, I don't see an end to it yet right now. I see how we can continue to evolve and adapt for the changing environment, and we will reach a point at some point in the future. But going to what Alina said, and I totally agree, we'll reach a point where we stop talking about AI as much as we're talking about it, and it just kind of becomes integrated into everything that we're doing, and becomes a seamless part of all of our ecosystem, our platforms, everything that we do. I don't see that's near, but I think that will come at some point in the future. But for that, it's like, sorry, I just had a blank there. But can you repeat the question again?
Sure. I had asked, at what stage does change management just
Right.
become the way we do things? And how
Yes.
do you see this horizon inside of CPS? Because I know you have a multi-year plan.
Yes, absolutely. And so we keep adding on some different projects in order to think about the future. And so some of the projects that we're doing right now includes something called like AI University, which we're implementing a long-term plan for implementing continuous professional development for all of our adult stakeholders, but also courses for all of our students, so that we have a district's digital curriculum called Skyline. And so that right now is core curriculum, K through 12 content. We're going to be adding AI courses and verticals for like AI in cybersecurity, AI in finance, AI in human resources, and so that we can keep adding those courses and evolving those courses to meet the needs of our all of our different stakeholders. And so also with regards to the professional development, as an example, we've been hosting professional learning communities with various different partners, including Stanford. And as we talk about next year, we're now talking about how do we do a tier 2 of that professional learning community. So for the individuals who've participated in the professional learning communities already, we continue to add on top and provide the higher level information and resources that they have. And so we're not just keeping everything too stagnant. We're actually providing those opportunities for people to continue that growth and the improvement that they want right now.
Yeah. We unfortunately are not going to be able to respond to all of the questions that came in through the question and answer function. I encourage you to join our individual speakers, Lorne, Alina, and Summer, at their own tables. When this session ends, you will be invited to go to a lounge. You can find the tables by each of their faces. You can go ask your questions individually to them. I encourage you to do that. I also check out the resources that are available. In particular, there is the change management case study that features Chicago Public Schools. In addition, tomorrow we'll be releasing links to a podcast that focuses on change management. It's about 20 minutes, and it features the experience of College Possible, the Calculus Project, and Catalyst ED in terms of how they experience change internally. A couple of things that came up over the course of our conversation together. One, and Summer, you started this out with this, is that people have to understand the value of the change to the organization. I encourage you to join me at the next session, which is identifying an AI-shaped opportunity, right? Don't chase the shiny object. How do you find real value in AI and ground your organization? And again, if you aren't able to attend that, it'll be ready for you for download and recorded by Friday. The other session that may be of interest to folks is how do you design internal training in ways that are really effective around AI use? That is also a session that is available to you over the course of today. Again, if you can't attend, it'll be recorded and available to you. But with this, I get to say thank you so much to Alina and Summer and Lorne for sharing your incredible experiences candidly, your expertise, and for helping all of us to keep people front and center when we think about AI. Thank you so much.